So this morning, I don't know who has been part of the first session this morning, where we discussed a lot about the role of head of remote, or like the fact that you need someone who's owning that in your company if you want to transition towards remote first, flexible first, digital first. Today we're talking just about that. So we have an amazing collective of absolute amazing people that I love, I follow for a long time now as well. And we're gonna discover really like, what do they do as head of remote in their own organization? And what does it mean for them in their organization? So let's start. So basically, I want to start first. We're going to do quite quickly because we are talkative people and we love talking. So we'll try to be as specific as possible. After the session, we will have a Slido and questions. So please make sure to go on there and ask your question. We will take at least a good 15 minutes for Q&A because I think there's a lot of people that have a lot of questions they want to ask. So let's start first. I will go one by one. Darren Murph is head of remote at GitLab. Can you let me know a little bit more, or a specific thing that characterizes what does that mean to be head of remote at GitLab?
It's a privilege to be head of remote at GitLab because we are an officeless company. So we have no physical real estate anywhere in the world. And so the one thing that differentiates my role from others would be I get to work cross-functionally across the entire team to make sure that operationally we are as strong as possible. How do you build operations when there is no physical building as a crutch? It's been an amazing journey.
So the operation part is kind of a good characteristic.
Yeah, that's right.
And what about you, Chase?
Similar.
Chase Warrington. Doist.
Chase Warrington at Doist, yeah. Similar to Darren, we're an officeless company, but we're a very small microcosm of what GitLab is. We've got 100 people in 35 different countries. And so similarly, I sit on the operations team, and my job is to make sure that our remote infrastructure is operating at peak efficiency. So I'm looking outwards to leaders like people sitting up here today, trying to figure out how can we take our remote team to the next level in the way that we approach work.
Awesome. And then you, Camilla, you changed companies because you were working for a fully remote company before in internal communications. Now you moved to a hybrid company and you're in executive communication. So what does that mean? What's the characteristic of your role and one thing that you could think about it?
So I am a big believer that communications is remote work in practice. So I have always come at remote work and hybrid work from the communications angle. So now I'm working at a hybrid company doing executive communications, helping our leaders show up and be the best leaders that they can be, which is super important when you're working in a hybrid or remote environment. And previously I was doing that from the internal communications and culture angle at a fully remote company.
Okay, and how does it different? Is it in a hybrid setup, is it very different?
I don't think it's very different.
Okay.
I think the common denominator is still remote. You still have people working in their homes. You have some people who are coming into the office some days, but you have to cater for everyone, and that means treating your workforce like they're remote, because if you come to rely on in-person meetings or showing up in the office, a lot of that information is going to get lost. Now, that requires discipline. That means that as a hybrid company, you can't get lazy, and you have to still have sort of the hygiene that we see in communications practices at remote companies, and that's part of my job is to drive that. Awesome.
And Tyler is amazing. You have to follow him on LinkedIn. He's the amazing LinkedIn person. Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't want to do it. Let you do it. But you know, so Tyler is now head of remote at Polygon for 6 months now, and it's quite new. So, what is your mission at Polygon?
So I report into the people team, and I'm kind of the liaison across the organization for, very similar to what Chase and Darren were mentioning, like how are we going to operate remotely, right? We are also an officeless company. We are fully remote, distributed across 40 plus countries with 500 plus employees. And when you're in that type of a company, how you develop the operating principles and like ways of working, that becomes the culture of how you even show up for one another. And so that's really important, like from the people team across the organization.
So people team, operation, there's a bit of marketing as well, right? In the head of remote role, like what aspect do you have that also has a bit of the employer branding in it? Maybe Darren?
Yeah, look, the world is ran by narratives. And when you're talking about stewarding operational change or remote change, or even if as an employer you're still figuring out what does our real estate footprint look like, it will never be the same as it used to be. There will always be a distributed element to your work going forward, and it behooves a lot of companies to approach that and agree that that change is happening. And then when you're stewarding that change, the marketing of it is essential. If you just lay out a bunch of policies, like here's our new remote work policy, people have change fatigue. There's been a lot of change over the past few years. You can't steward change with policy. You can't galvanize people with policy. You have to explain a bit of the why and kind of walk them through why should we invest in upskilling ourselves, our teams? Why should we invest in thinking differently about enabling inclusive and equitable access to information no matter where people are in the world? A lot of that is marketing. You first have to market and communicate, as Camilla was saying, to your internal team. They're your first audience. But the second audience is, how can we share this with the world? We'll talk about this, but the open source ethos is key to stewarding the remote work transformation. And really that starts with the marketing of it. We've all learned a lot from how our organizations are approaching this new future of work differently. Embrace that. We are actively building what tomorrow will look like. There's very little that's defined at this point. And so marketing it internally, getting people on board with wanting to be a part of that change is key. And for employers looking for great talent, you want to find people that are invested in building that future for you. And so being as open and transparent about that as possible is very useful for talent branding and recruiting.
We have communication as well as kind of a big part of, you know, your role is not head of remote, but you're still really kind of bringing everybody together to create cohesion and everything. Like, what does that mean? What do you do on a day-to-day, more specifically?
So I think for remote and hybrid work to work, you have to have really strong communication practices, because you have to be able to share information in a way that everybody has equitable access to it, and you have to also help your leaders show up in a way that they are inspiring people and motivating people no matter where in the world they are, and that is all communication. Layer on top of that, that communication is how marketing happens too, right? Like your marketing happens through communication. So it becomes this exercise in marketing internally and externally, and communications is just the infrastructure with which you run a successful hybrid or remote team. Now I know I'm biased, but I do basically think that it's the core principle that we all need to figure out if we're going to be successful in creating these remote and hybrid workforces.
I think that's what candidates are asking, right? Are we serious about being a remote first company? Are we serious about digital transformation? Are we serious about those things? Well, are you even dedicating headcount to it, right? Do you have a head of remote? Oh, well, we do. Oh, okay, well, that's a different kind of conversation with a candidate who is like primarily interested in working in a company that's working to become, you know, a document-first collaboration model, right? Being asynchronous. Like our company, you know, has people working from every time zone from Seattle to Sydney. Okay, well, what do you have to do in that situation to be able to work together well? You can't start with meetings every time. That doesn't work, right? It is unsustainable to work that way. So we have headcount directly pointed at us becoming better at that.
Yeah, when you talk about the marketing aspect, that was actually the catalyst for us deciding to hire a head of remote. We'd been remote first for 15 years. So it wasn't as if something suddenly shifted where we said, oh, we need a head of remote just to fix a few problems internally. What we wanted to showcase to people who were formerly looking at Doist as a great place to come work simply because we were remote first, and instead saying, not just that, we're going to do it at a really high level. We're going to make sure that we're delivering the best possible experience to the best possible candidates out there, because we know our people are our strongest asset. So that was something that we consciously made the decision to address, and I think it's worked out for us. But it's exactly to that point. It's serving those needs and showcasing that we're not just going to do remote, but we're going to do this at a really high level.
We're going to walk the talk.
Yeah.
Do you have something to add, Darren?
Yeah, I forgot to mention this earlier, but for context, GitLab is almost 2,000 people in 60 plus countries, and last year became the first all-remote company to become a public company. So it's a big deal that distributed work not only can scale, but it's kind of a peek into the future of we can let go of some of the vestiges of the past, but it takes more than just letting go. You also have to unlearn some things and embrace some new things. And I think the common thread here is you want to embrace this and you want to market it because you want to bring in a new wave of talent that helps you build the future of work. Even if you get so explicit as to add a line item to future job descriptions as a requirement that says, you will come in and help us invest in building the future of work. You want to be that explicit with people. And for candidates that look at GitLab, they know what we're about. It's very transparent. You know what you're getting into, and there is an element of self-selection. When you're building the future, it has to look different than the past, and you want to invite that caliber of person who has passion for doing things differently, which upsetting the status quo, not always the most comfortable thing, but it's very necessary if we're going to build something better than what we've had in the past.
And I mean, you guys have been very inspiring in the past 2 years, I think, giving so much for everyone. Nobody has any excuse not to be able to do that now because they have access to everything because everything is open source. So go ahead and go read it.
I became a successful remote job seeker, remote leader. I became a head of remote, thanks mostly in part to the learning that GitLab and Darren have been publishing online. I have no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I became who I am professionally because of the learning that they've done out loud. That's what we're doing here today as well. But I think that's what Darren is saying is that we're doing a new thing. Okay, are you willing to go on that journey as a company and empower the people that are working at your company to say, we haven't figured this out, right? And we're going to identify a few champions, right? And maybe a champion, right? Head of remote, maybe that's at your company, but say that we're going to do this in a way that is not fixed. We are going to iterate. We're going to keep evaluating what's working and not working for us, right? And our specific expression of a company, right? We're speaking from Berlin, Germany, right? A German-speaking remote company is going to look a lot different than an English-speaking remote company that is distributed from Seattle to Sydney, as I was saying, right? There's going to be different versions of this that fit different companies, and you and your people are the ones that know how to do that best.
Awesome. I really want to dig a bit deeper in the work that you guys are doing. I want to know what are the key objectives that you're trying to accomplish every day. If you can one thing, all of you, one by one, you can start with Chase.
I mentioned earlier that when we first decided to hire a head of remote, we'd already been remote for 15 years. So we had 100 people, 35 countries, none of that changed. We're also a productivity company. We produce software that empowers remote teams, and we're very focused on that. So we're pretty good at the remote work thing. What we realized we weren't really good at was the connection bit. We weren't really good at humanizing remote work. So this became my top priority when I took over as head of remote. And so I've spent a predominant part of the past year figuring out how do we better connect our workforce virtually, in person. How do we make this whole thing work aside from just the work, the human connection. So that's what I spend a good bit of my time on. That's probably my top priority still.
That's awesome.
I'm involved in building and showcasing our decentralized workplace. So first of all, I'm working on adoption of our workplace tools and like teaching people how to use things, and then also simultaneous to that, trying to help people see what is available to them internally and externally to say, we are a remote company. We are a decentralized company, like in the same way that we're building platform for decentralized applications that, hey, we're from everywhere and doing things in all these places. So it's kind of both sides of that, where I'm advocating internally for the things that we're doing, and then also externally, here's who we are, and come join.
What about you, Camilla?
So I would say I'm trying to create united and high-performing cultures through communications. And so the united part of that is more the sort of fuzzy, touchy-feely thing that we don't quite know how to put our finger on, but it's when you have a mission that people are really connected to, when you have leaders that people really want to follow, when you have those intrinsic motivations that are getting people up out of bed every day and getting them to want to come to work and really do their best work. That's a piece of it. And then the high-performing piece of it is, how do we facilitate them doing their best work? Well, we give them the tools that they need. We make it easy for them to find the information that they need. We don't bury things in meetings. We record everything. We put it there. So, if you happen to be asleep because you're in a different time zone, it's easy for you to find that and just keep rolling, keep doing your best work. So for me, it's the same thing. It's the same thing that these guys are doing, but my focus is doing that through the communications tools, systems, infrastructure, and practices that we're building at Checkout.
Yeah, so I'll give you the example of, I hope to consider myself a bit of a cloud architect. So what does that mean? If you were starting a new company and you were going to plant an office in a city, you would meet with an architect and you would plan out every minute detail. There would be intentionality around, what does the door look like? Where are the lobbies? Where are the cafeterias? How wide are the hallways? Where are the meeting places? All of this intentionality would go into building that workplace. But when you're working in a distributed environment, you can't just say, everyone can work from home and change nothing else. You have to put that same amount of intentionality, if not more, into architecting your office in the cloud. And even if you have multiple offices around the world, they are remote to one another. So you can't get around the fact that we are now working in a remote world. Even if you have 2 offices where everyone is fully co-located, they're remote to one another. And so what I try to do is make teamwork an objective discipline. So much about work has been codified and made an objective discipline. But when we look at teams and how interactions happen and how communications happen, how workflows happen, so much of it is DIY. It's at the whims of the manager. And in a fully remote company, that's not sustainable. And so we have to codify single sources of truth, where work happens, where informal communication happens, memos over meetings, documentation over synchronous when at all possible. These are the things that I think about every day. And for a lot of people, they're not the default. It's not how work has been done in the future. And so we're having to architect new ways of doing that and help people come along for the ride, because it's, for a lot of folks, it's not their default.
People are forgetting that they have to set the foundation of the company. They have to rebuild everything. It's not just a change of a location. Your whole company culture and functioning is changing.
Yeah, so the bad news is you have to change everything.
Yeah.
But the good news is that's an amazing opportunity to do things differently and fix the things that you weren't really happy about with work as it was before.
I think that's also just such an important point, that even companies that don't classify themselves as remote or hybrid, if you have multiple offices in multiple locations, there is an element of remote there, right? So for employees out there thinking, how does it apply to me, or what's my model going to look like going forward? Well, we're already there. As long as you don't have everybody co-located in one building in the world, like, there's an element of that. And so it's an opportunity, right? It's like, how do we capitalize on that? How do we let people live the lifestyle that they want to live, whether it's in 2 offices in different parts of the world or from homes all over the world, and provide them with the infrastructure that makes that totally not only viable, but actually, creates a boost for business and for productivity in general.
We were talking a little bit backstage, right, about the realities of remote today and where we are. And the fact is we've transitioned past that knee-jerk reaction that we had during the pandemic, where it was like, okay, we got to figure out how to make this work because we don't have another option. Now we're in a stage where people are actually optimizing their remote infrastructure, how they're going to create connection, how they're going to communicate, how they're going to do the documentation, how they're going to make this actually work at a really high level. And it doesn't matter how distributed you are. As you said, we're all distributed on some level now. And so that's the zone that we're in. I think the scary thing for some people is they're thinking, oh, we're getting left behind. We're not quite there yet. We don't have those things in place. But I don't think you're as far behind as you think you are. I talk to people every day who are saying the same exact thing. We're still trying to get out of that knee-jerk reaction phase. And so now is the time to do it, to either stay with the curve or get ahead of the curve, because that inevitability is coming.
I think one of the items that I bring up often when I'm speaking to people that are like trying to figure out the trade-offs of in-person, hybrid, fully remote, those sorts. I think it's really important to imagine it as a spectrum, right? Imagine it as a both and instead of an either or, right? And really to take those times when you do have to make a choice of one thing over another thing, and be reflective and be considered. I quote Darren all the time saying that remote work is a forcing function for intentionality. And because everyone was forced to go remote, even those organizations that are going to choose to be in an office and like probably should adopt some document first best practice, even if they have just 2 floors of one building, because those stairs are a barrier between people. I think it's really important for us to like identify what do we want to retain, and also to say, is this still serving us? Oh, it's not? Okay, we'll set that down and pick something else up. And stay agile, stay reflective and considered about how you're working together. And I think that's one of the cool things about working in the cloud is that so much more of that is adaptable day to day, right? And not fixed and like had to have like a literal architect and construct it, right? Like that architecture can change based upon feedback. Much easier in a remote first situation.
But imagine also if everybody, even those who still want to work in office, were doing that, engineering and architecting the way they work. It is important in any situation.
Well, what we found is that a lot of great remote first principles are great business principles. And for those that follow GitLab, you may have seen that last week we just launched our Team Ops people practice. And really what that is a culmination of 10 plus years of how GitLab scaled from an all remote company into a global public company. And through many of those years against the grain. COVID has given us permission to normalize this conversation, but it was not normalized for a very long time. And we're codifying that and sharing that so that we can open the minds of leaders of what does architecting a new way of working look like.
So Chase mentioned something very specific that was like this main priority of something that he wants to change was connection. Is there something else that you have a personal mission in your company that you want to focus on as your main priority?
Do you mind if I start this one? I love this topic. I have found that remote first or remote thoughtful companies, they have to be even more intentional about their connection and in-person strategy because you don't have the office as the crutch. So you have to be more thoughtful about what does connection mean in our company. And I really think that long-term workplace culture will largely be built outside of the workplace. And this boggles the minds of many people leaders because it's this realization that the command and control of manufacturing connection no longer works. When you enable people to live and work where they're most fulfilled, you give them this opportunity to be intimately connected with a physical community, a home that was not possible in the prior way of working. So instead of being dismayed by that these people might rather spend time in their local community instead of in your Zoom happy hour, you can turn that around and say, where is the opportunity in this? And at GitLab, we've come up with this concept called the community impact outing as a one-to-one replacement for a Zoom happy hour. You take that same hour, you deploy people in their community, maybe they serve at a local food bank, they read at a local library, you ask them to wear company swag, take a selfie of themselves while they're out there, and share that back in a medium that the entire company can see. And with that same hour scaled across the company, you have now created much more genuine, authentic connection. For example, I'm an adoptive dad. If I spend that hour working in the adoption community and share that piece of media back with my team, that may unlock real connection to other people across the company that are in the adoption community. That's real, tangible connection that you can unlock in a distributed setting. All of this goes back to looking at this through the lens of opportunity instead of fear. So that's just one example that I think employers could implement immediately. No additional cost, no additional infrastructure. You can do this tomorrow. It's just enabling and empowering people with their time.
Creating more cohesion, more connection is really what I'm hearing a lot from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think related to that, for me, it's all about authenticity. I think remote and hybrid work invites us to show up and live our lives in a more authentic way than we had the freedom to do before, when we were sort of beholden to committing 2 hours of our day to commute and 8 hours of our day to sit in an office somewhere. And so now my mission is to kind of bring that to reality in the work that I do in communications. So helping my leaders show up super authentically. And that means being vulnerable, which is a hard thing for a leader, and doing that at scale, which is even harder. And for the people who are in the community of, you know, the place that I'm working in, allowing them to bring every part of themselves that they want to work, and sharing their passions and their interests and, you know, whatever it is that makes them them. Just that integration of work and life, where we used to see such a clear division before, giving people a chance to integrate a bit more and be more authentic. And when you create a community and a culture in a company that values that, then people start to do it in return, right?
I feel like I'm rhyming really hard with what you guys are saying, but the phrase that I said earlier that some of you had resonated with you was to kind of invite this inverting of the identity stack, where to say, okay, for myself, I am a spouse, I am a parent, I am a youth sports coach, I am a faith community member, I'm a remote working advocate. Like, even before I am a professional, at a specific company. Now, like, my job as head of remote at Polygon is in service to those other identities. And I think, like, for people to embrace that idea, like, it makes it possible for you to come further up and further into the organization, because it's in service to who you are as a person, even if you weren't working there. And that is like reflecting that power dynamic, adjustment that happens when, if we're not being forced to like get in a car or some transportation mode to get to a centralized office, right? We are less and less like able to exert power over people, right? We have to share power with, power to, and power within others, right? And I'm quoting Brene Brown super hard right there. So just like, if you want all the links, like just DM me later, because I have them in my clipboard manager, right? But like that type of stuff is really, really powerful when we say to people, you are in charge of you. You are in charge of your workspace. Like, we're no longer going to submit to the tyranny of the mean, right? The temperature in the office, right? I took my jacket off because you guys are too warm here in Europe. I get to set the temperature how I feel comfortable in my house, right? And I'm not making anybody else cold, right? I think that's really, really neat that we get to have these idiosyncratic expressions of ourselves that also are connected to a broader mission and company goals. And like making that happen is what I'm about.
I think one of the low-hanging fruits that people that are watching or listening to this are in a lot of cases wondering if they should employ or have somebody in a role similar to what we're doing. And that can be one of those low-hanging fruits. You don't even have to call somebody the head of remote or the remote lead or whatever. But if you have somebody who's passionate about building the remote infrastructure and making sure that this is done in a lively and sustainable way, that can be a really, really nice low-hanging fruit, is just thinking about what Tyler just said, that inversion of who we are, and figuring out how can I get people who are those other identities to find a place to connect in this distributed workforce that we have. And just, I mean, they're free, they're easy, they're activities and that you can implement very quickly and give people real meaning to connect around. And that can build your workforce in a really meaningful way.
I was actually about to connect with, the title of today's like employer of the future. Like, what would you say to someone who wants to be considered an employer of the future? Do they need to create a head of remote role, or is it the right title? Also, it's kind of like, the title itself is debatable. But what do you think? I mean, Camilla, go ahead.
So I worked previously at a fully remote company. Now I'm at a hybrid company. Neither of those companies have had a fully remote or a head of remote role, to be honest. My title when I was at Hopin, the fully remote company, was head of internal comms and culture. Now I do executive communications. a lot of the work that I do overlaps a lot with the heads of remote on the stage. So I don't think you need to have that title. I don't think and I also don't think it's sufficient to say that you're an employer of the future just because you hired a head of remote. Like, I don't think those two things equate each other. I think really what we need to see from employees of the future is recognition and commitment to empowering people to do work in a way that works for them and allows them to deliver to the full extent of their ability, and that might mean a different take on work-life integration than what we've traditionally seen and thought.
Yeah, I also don't think that the title's super important. I think the important thing is we use the word intentionality a lot up here today, and so it's being intentional about this and deciding as a company, are we fully embracing this new wave of the way that we're going to work? And if so, would it behoove us to have somebody leading that charge? And I mean, I believe almost always the answer is going to be yes. Then the decision is, do we hire somebody to be that internal champion? And if you make that decision, I guarantee your results will be 10x what they would if you had just sat back and left it to happenstance. And we've seen that play out. Doesn't matter what the title is. People at different companies have stepped into this role and led the charge through the transition and then beyond. And so I do think it's an important step to take, but it's not so much the title, it's about that intentionality of, do we want someone to be this champion for us, and then moving on from there.
I was the remote work nerd at some, fully remote companies before I joined Polygon, and I filled in the gap for companies that because it was something that I was passionate about. Who in your organization is passionate about remote working and best practices there? Like, they would love to be invited into that space. I guarantee that they would give away personal time to commit to that because it is something that they are excited about. There's nothing wrong with being an invitational leader and saying, we have needs. Would anyone like to raise their hand for this? And you'd be surprised just how many people are running towards those types of opportunities. I think that, I obviously am somebody just very recently was a whole other career, right? And I think it's one of those things where if you are clear and you are directed, right, there's nothing stopping anybody from achieving that kind of remote work transformation or innovative practice if you just hold open that space for it to occur, right? That space will be filled.
Yeah, the one thing I would add here is that we're at the forefront of something pretty significant. If you look at organizations globally, it's not uncommon anymore to find someone leading the charge on diversity, inclusion, belonging. Not too long ago, those concepts were just a single line item for the chief people officer. But at some point, we reached an inflection moment where it became much bigger than that. And it deserved its own space, its own leader, if not its own team. And remote work has moved from something that was a perk that you would potentially allow someone to work remotely if they were of a certain seniority level. It has graduated from that to a business necessity. Now it is something that globally people want and expect the flexibility that comes along with that. And so if it has graduated from a perk to a business necessity, I would argue that you should probably put someone or a team in charge of making sure that it's done well.
I love you said, or a team, because it's rarely just one person. There's a lot of people in your team. You had the Vibe team at Hopin. You're just starting that team. I'm sure you have a team as well. How many people do you have in your team just caring for the remote employee experience?
Yeah, well, I have 3 people directly on this team, but we report into the CEO. And so it's very much a operations-focused role. The common thread across all functions in a distributed setting is that we all work remotely or we have to work with others who are remote. Doesn't matter if you're in engineering or finance or legal, your workflows will be a bit different from function to function, but the common thread is we need to have some baseline understanding of how we operate as a company. What is your operating manual as a company? I like to look at it as if you were to box up your company and ship it to someone, Amazon Prime it to someone, and they open the box and there was a manual in there, could they figure out how to use it? You have to be that explicit on writing and creating and shipping and evolving the operating manual to your company, because the people that are already there have to understand how to operate it, the people that are coming in have to understand how to operate it, and ideally, the clients you partner with could have a look in as well and understand how to operate with you. And so it deserves a team if you're that serious about creating that operating manual.
I want to hear also from Camilla, because when you used to be with Hopin, you were having the Vibe team. Can you explain a little bit what was that?
So the Vibe team was Hopin's creation to designate the fact that we were very serious about building a successful, fully remote organization. We were called the Vibe team because we were responsible for the vibe, was like a very flippant sort of way of saying it, name that we came up with for the team. But it was this very interesting makeup of people. So we also, our reporting structure changed, which speaks to the fact that there is no blueprint right now for the role that a head of remote or people playing this role where they sit within an organization. We reported to the chief of staff to the CEO, then we reported to the chief people officer, then we reported to the CMO. So we moved around a lot, and that was because the makeup of the team was myself on the communications and culture side, and then we had an operations person who was looking more specifically at the tools, because that's a super important part of it, is who's vetting the tools that create the infrastructure for this remote organization to be successful, and deciding what communications platforms are we going to be using, what HR platforms are we going to be using, what knowledge base are we going to be using. So we had an operations person. We had an events person who was helping us create super fun and super informative internal events that people actually wanted to come to, which was something we were very proud of. And then who else did we have? We had like a coordinator who supported us kind of across all of those functions. But it really was, a holistic commitment to all of the different facets of what it takes to tackle this problem of creating a successful remote organization from multiple angles.
And I'll just quickly say that if you had a physical office, you would have all of that.
Right.
But it's stunning to me in the remote transformation how few organizations have parlayed one to the other. And then they're wondering, why are we struggling? Why are our people not as connected as they used to be? Why are things falling through the cracks? And I think a lot of that is not mapping one-to-one the amount of intentionality that is really required.
I was going to do a quick thank you, Camilla, on the Vibe team thing, because actually, like talking about building in public, I read an article that you wrote a couple years ago and took inspiration from that, and we built what we call the social crew at Doist, which leads a lot of our social initiatives and how we connect. We started a social calendar. We have events set up every week that people can opt into and stuff. And so anyway, a lot of that was derived from this, but it brings us back to that point about intentionality and creating space for people to collaborate around things that they're passionate about. In this case, they're passionate about social connections, so we have people on the team who are spending time building that for the rest of the team. They're connecting, they're building more connections, and so anyway, I took inspiration from that, and we implemented it at Doist as well.
I'm very glad that was useful, and I think that's another trait of this community is like we're all learning out loud.
Yeah.
We're all sharing information, and that's super cool.
Yeah, the building in public mindset is incredible from this community.
Yeah, the remote team is just me at Polygon, but I am working cross-functionally inside of our operations department, the strategy team. I report into the internal comms part of our people team. So it's very cross-functional in that, and even my previous history with customer success, I am also working directly with our the IT team, right? Basically, that's not what we call it, but the MIS team, right? Of ensuring the adoption and like actual usage of things, right? So it's one of those deals where you can't pin this down. Somebody's got to report to somebody, but I think it's one of those things where, just like Darren's saying about a cloud architect, right? Who is going to ensure that there's something there to show up to when you're working digitally, right? Because for me, I am somebody who is really, really good at making friends online, right? I if you follow me on LinkedIn and you're somebody that I enjoy and as a person I want to make friends with, right? I am going to comment, I am going to I am going every single thing that you do, right? Like, well, why is that? Well, because I want to be a person to you digitally, right? And that needs to be enabled and empowered inside of your company, right? So, like, for stuff that shows up in the channels that I'm involved in our text messaging platform, I emoji react to all of it.
Digital personal branding is very
and
important.
for the stuff that deserves a reply, I reply in the thread to all of it. And it doesn't take you long, but like sometimes when you send that message to that whole channel and there's like crickets, right? It's as if you were in a conference room by yourself and no one was there. It's really important to show up and show other people that you see them, right? And like, how do you do that digitally? Well, you press the button, right?
Yeah.
It's as easy as that. Press the button for folk.
Talking about the like where we sit on the org chart and teams and stuff, it's really funny because in my role, like I'm a team of one now, and so I'm running this team of the head of remote department as a team of one, but it doesn't feel like that at all. It's such a cross-functional role. And when I first started in this role, I reached out to everybody that I could that was in a similar role, just to kind of pick their brain. And there was no red thread that connected them all, except for the fact that there was no red thread that connected them all. And they were all cross-functional by nature, baked into the role. You're going to work with the people team, you're going to work with the finance team, you're going to work with the engineering teams, whatever. And you're trying to do a lot of different things within the organization. So I find that really interesting. And I would, for anybody that's considering this role, kind of keep that in mind, that it doesn't, although it might sit, in my case, under the COO, on any given day, I'm working on a project with the people ops team, the finance team, heads from different departments. And so I think cross-functionality by nature and connecting with other departments to enable them to work at a higher level is kind of the baseline of the position.
Thank you. I think it closed really well our questions, our organized questions all together, but I think it's really interesting to hear from you. There's already a lot of questions coming up on Slido, and I really want to make sure we have enough time because usually there's the best learnings doing Q&As, I think.
I agree. Got some good stuff.
So I also recommend that you go and upvote the one that you think also should be valuable and you want answered. That's always easier to prioritize the one that we are having. So the first one is, what does work look like for you in 10 years, and how are offices part of this version? Because we cannot be blind around this, you know?
I want to raise my hand for that because I was talking to Elodie earlier, and she does like a business around co-living and co-working type of stuff. And I think for me, stop thinking of offices, right? Take it up a level, right? And do the meta kind of like conversation about it. And what is your in-person strategy, right? Because offices are becoming off-sites, right? Or on-sites, right? I mean, what is that for you? It's really thinking about what is the in-person part of it. It's part of that spectrum of experiences, because most of the time, for remote-first organizations, you're going to be on your own, in your own workspaces, however you design them best for you to get your work done. But there's also going to be that component that, like, I see Darren and Chase and Camilla's stuff like at Hopin, at GitLab, at Doist, like those are retreats that I would want to be at, right? And how do you develop connection to the company, connection to one another that are going to launch and relaunch the next quarter, the next half year, this next fiscal year? Like, how are you going to like do those sorts of behaviors that really draw people together in person and draw people together like virtually? Like it's both and.
There's a lot of questions, so what we'll do, I think, is that we're going to do one each.
Okay.
So we'll make sure that we have more questions answered and everybody can.
That is a lot of questions.
So next one, 7-time upvote by Eduardo. What best practices have you identified that managers can use to engage their teams remotely?
I can be really quick with this.
Okay.
GitLab Team Ops, Google it. It's a free certification. No, I'm not kidding. 10 years worth of work into this, and it's all there. That's way too layered and complex of a question to give any answer on this stage. You would be much better diving into 10 years of research and Google others.
I can just say, I mean, I've been working remotely for 13 years and been leading remote teams for most of that across the world, and I just took the certification last week, and I walked away with like pages of notes. So yeah, that's a good answer to that question, I think.
I think our answer is, it's such a good question that Darren wrote a whole qualification
Yes,
on it.
it's such an apt question that I literally built a certification around this because the world's managers need to know this. And it's not just one or two things. It is a mindset shift. It is an array of tools. The good news is they're out there.
Awesome. So what are the top 3 portals or websites you look for potential candidates? This question is for all the panelists. Okay, we want to make sure everybody is going to answer that. Okay. So, like, what do you use? I guess because we are in a people HR event, so.
Yeah, I'll answer it this way. We selectively screen for people who are managers of one. And at GitLab, we've literally documented what are the principles that make up a manager of one. People find us from all over the place. I don't think we go to one portal. But that we have found that array of qualifications usually sets people up to be very successful in a remote role.
In like what you're looking for, I think for the question is really about like where do you hire from? Like where do you post your jobs? Where can, what are the main ones that you would recommend, Camilla?
I mean, the default has been LinkedIn, right? But I think LinkedIn is a little bit broken. I don't think it has a great solution for hybrid and remote companies, really. I think there's lots of innovation going on out there. I was just speaking to Alex earlier, who's building a company that solves for this problem, which I think is awesome, because we don't have a great way of identifying really great remote talent right now, because everything has been to do with your geographic location. So I don't know. I mean, everybody should speak to Alex, I guess, is my answer.
Yes, we will talk later today also. Well, at the end of the day, there's the last session with Alex. So our next questions. So what's the hardest yet important part of your job? So, yeah, anyone that has a
I think it really is the shift, the mindset shift from having a meeting-centered model of collaboration, right, to a document-centered. That's not to say no meetings. That's not to say only documents, right? It's to say, where do we start? Like, we're collaborating. We're working together. Okay, let's schedule a meeting is very often the first move in trying to build progress towards something. That is not the way to do it. Start with a document and ramp up to that meeting, right? Think of like the very best consultants that you've worked with.
I wish I had air horns right now.
Think of the very best consultants you've worked with, right? They spent a very long time fine-tuning that deck before they ever presented it to you. Well, what are they doing? They are starting with a document and anchoring the thoughts and ideas that you're going to have during that meeting on very specific images, text, not this text, this text. You start with a document. That's the hardest part and is the most important part of my job, is to draw people towards that model of working.
Yeah, I mean, it's just very different also because what's interesting in your role also is that in comparison from those who are actually coming much more from the remote community and the remote tools and everything, you really work for a company that is in cryptocurrency, and then they are just wanting to really own.
I'm gonna push back. We are a blockchain technology.
Sorry.
That of which
crypto,
currencies are
NFT,
digital currencies are a part of that. Yes.
So just making sure we're clear. But it's just very different. It's like this is for the first time, like I'm starting to see actual companies of 500 plus employees saying like, okay, we're gonna create a position for this because we're taking this seriously.
Interestingly, one of the hardest parts of my job is the opposite of that, because we're a hyper asynchronous organization by nature, with that baked into our DNA to a fault. There is a place for synchronicity, there's a place for connecting on a more human level, and so one of the hardest things that I've had to do is figure out how to break down some of those barriers that we built up where we've thought, we've changed from meetings are toxic to meetings can be toxic, for example. And that mindset shift of it's okay to schedule a meeting in that case. So it's obviously much broader than that, but I find that interesting because I see a lot of people transitioning to the distributed workforce and thinking, okay, how do we get rid of all the synchronicity? And on the flip side of that, I'm trying to infuse a little bit into it, and there's some resistance and friction there, obviously.
I'll just add from the hybrid perspective, a lot of what we're talking about is unlearning, I think, and in the hybrid world, the unlearning that has to happen is the definition of an office or the intention of an office, because for so long, you ask anybody what an office is, it's a place that people go to do their jobs. And I think we need to just change that so that your office becomes a place of social connection where work can also happen in a collaborative way, but it is not exclusively the place that you go to do work, right? So any company that's pursuing a hybrid model that still has an office in the equation needs to redefine what that office is to them and the purpose that it serves. And I think I see that at checkout right now. That's a hard thing for people to do, is to reframe the purpose of this building that we go to 2 days a week.
Wow. What can we do to drive cross-functional? What can we do to drive cross-functional collaboration in remote teams and avoid silo working? Chase.
This is something we take really seriously at Doist. I mentioned we're a productivity company, and so we develop software that enables this. And so obviously we have to get it right. That's pretty important. We'd be bad at our jobs if we weren't. So I think it comes back to this word of intentionality we've thrown around a lot today. And you have to create an intentional system that creates cross-functional work. We all work on our teams. Somebody sits on the marketing team, the finance team, the back-end team, whatever it may be. But then we also have a system of what we call Doist objectives. Every month you're cross-functionally working with an entirely new, different crew of people on a project. So you're sprinting together, you're bonding, you're building something really cool and interesting that unites you. And that changes monthly. You still go back to your normal team, you're working with those same people day in and day out, but you're getting this opportunity to collaborate with other people. You don't have to use the Doist system to do this, there's lots of them out there, but I think it's getting intentional about creating cross-functionality, because what this question is alluding to is one of the problems that can exist with remote work, and unfortunately what a lot of people experienced during pandemic remote is that siloed effect of just working in your own little silo, figuratively and literally. So taking this very seriously, I think, is a great step.
Yeah, I'll say move from silo to single, as in single source of truth. So the common thread there is people are working in a single central hallway. There's a single source of truth for work. So if you want a quick way to uncover this, audit your organization. Audit your organization. Find what work is duplicative, and start eliminating that. And when you're speaking and communicating and collaborating in a single source of truth, all of this goes a lot better.
We won't be able to answer all of the questions, okay? Just know, because we have 18 questions also still. How do you convince your leaders to join you on your journey to remote first, fully remote? Tone at the top is critical, isn't it? And I will put this question to Tyler, because I think that, for you, it's kind of, it kind of came from the top.
Let's just tell the story. Let's tell the story. So, Polygon
quickly, because I think Camilla has something to add.
I was just going to call on Camilla here.
Oh, yeah, as well? Okay.
That Polygon came into Darren's DMs, and he sent them to me. And really, to me, to really connect the remote strategy to the company strategy, right? So for me, right, I believe in distributed, workforces, right? Well, I took that phrase and adapted it to, the Web3 community, right? So we're building the platform for decentralized applications. That's what Polygon is, right? We're building in the Ethereum ecosystem, blah, 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 blockchain. I already said the jargon words, right? But the idea is that we're going to connect that to our remote strategy, right? We are building the decentralized workplace that is building the platform for decentralized applications. Connect those dots for them, right? Make it about the company strategy. So that's what I wanted to say, is just make it about the company strategy. Camilla?
No, I think that's completely right. It's about establishing a common goal with your leadership. Now, hopefully, if they're hiring for a remote role, then they're kind of already on board with the mission. But I think this is even more relevant for hybrid environments, to be honest, where you might have some skeptics at the top, right? And in that case, it's the same thing when you're trying to win any argument. You just establish common ground. You establish a common goal, right? So, if the goal is, like, leader, can you and I both agree that the goal is to have a super motivated workforce that's going to show up every day and do their best work and deliver the best results for our customers and for this company? Your leader is going to go, yeah, I can get on board with that. And you say, okay, well, the way to do that is build a remote or hybrid system of work that is going to empower them to do that. And suddenly that's a bulletproof argument, right?
And often these roles don't exist. They're not listed. They're starting to create these roles, but you actually usually have to pitch that role in to the company. So you're the one in the company that's going to be the one pitching for head of remote, but you have to create it for yourself as well.
I think you also have to ask those leaders, like, just very frankly, in 10 years, will the workforce be more distributed or less distributed than we are today? And which one of those two paths are we building towards as an organization? We don't want to arrive to that point thinking, okay, what got us here isn't going to get us there. We need to go ahead and adapt to that coming future now. And I've seen that work for people who are trying to get their leaders on board, so it's worth mentioning.
And one last thing is, Darren and I were talking about this, but there's still an opportunity here. Like, we're just at the inflection point of this thing. So if you can position it to your leaders of like, let's capitalize on this. Let's build infrastructure that's going to help us scale for the future and stay ahead of this wave rather than getting caught up in it, then you can use it to your advantage, right? You can hire the best talent in the world, and you can build a team that is super motivated and super productive before anyone else has even really cottoned on to what we're doing.
So I'm not sure we're doing for time. We're going to take one last question. I think we're good. One last. Okay. So I was just interested in that one.
We can go lightning round.
Are you ever using digital spaces such as Gather or Wonder? And if yes, for what reasons? Did you ever experience? This is like a metaverse.
I've tested it some. Didn't get any buy-in. It's just, again, coming back to the pain point that I probably experience more than others of trying to infuse more synchronicity. It just doesn't sit well. We're also like only 100 people spread across all time zones, so very distributed. So those spaces become very quiet in that environment.
Yeah, my perspective is this is skeuomorphism. You're literally trying to copy the office in a virtual space. I can't say that that's the wrong approach for every company, but I will say if you're going to invest the time and energy in standing something like this up, it would be much more beneficial to invest in tooling where you could collaborate in the same space, not meet in the same space. You don't want to put anything in your company that encourages presenteeism, just being there for the sake of being there. That is in no way related to productivity. So if you're going to invest in a digital tooling, a tool stack, make sure it's where work happens or where connection and bonding happens. So potentially if these are for your connection and belonging strategy, I think that's okay. But don't assume that this will allow for deeper work collaboration.
You don't want to ever end up in a point where you say like, let's meet in, or I don't think, my opinion. You don't want, let's set a meeting and gather to get X done. You don't want that to become your culture.
Awesome. I think we can wrap it up here. Otherwise, unless you want me to continue, Peter, with more questions, but I think we're going to a break afterwards. Do you want to take over, or should I close?
We have
Okay,
two more.
awesome.
No, I mean, I'll sit here all day and answer questions, so you're going to have to stop us.
Okay.
Do we have time
You
for
want
a
me to
couple
take
more?
more questions?
Do two more questions,
Two more
and then I've
questions.
got two questions.
Okay, then you have questions. Okay, cool. Can you name one first step when it comes to improving internal remote communication?
Sure. So the first step is do your research, understand the problem, because I think people make assumptions as to what the problem is. They might just say like, oh, people aren't sharing information enough, or whatever it is. They make these assumptions. I've seen it happen on teams that I've sat on, that we have assumed what the problem is based on our own personal experience or the experience of our team. So I would say, get a survey out there, actually understand what the problem is and how it manifests for the different organizations within your company, and then try to find solutions from there. Because a lot of times, like I said, people jump to the solution and they hear about like the latest, greatest flashy tool and they try to bring that in without actually checking to see if it maps to the problem that they found. And I've been surprised with the research that I've done within the companies that I've sat on that I thought a problem was manifesting a certain way. I thought that I could solve the root cause, and then when I actually asked people, it was something pretty different. So my first piece of advice is just get to know your problem before you try to solve it.
Also, next one. What does work look like for you? This is what's already there, no?
They shifted that one down. That is a great question, though. Can I answer that one quickly?
Which one? Which one? The office?
Yeah, what does work
What
look
does
like
work
for
look
you?
like for you in 10 years?
And how are offices part of this vision? Look, I think the second and third order effects of this transition are going to be monumental. We're talking about reversal of rural depopulation. Like entire small and mid-sized towns have been gutted because people have had to move to urban centers for opportunity. What happens when that's not the case? You allow them to move back to these places and bring economic activity back to places that have been gutted through the old ways of working. That's really powerful. People are able to be close to things that deeply matter to them, and they will port that energy into their workforce. And so for employers here, make that connection. If you let go a bit, you actually get back a lot. And in 10 years, I think we'll see a much healthier relationship between employee and employer. How are offices part of this? I don't know. Like, we're still at the first inning of this, but I will say this removes the millstone off of the office. For hundreds of years, the office has had to serve a very specific purpose. And if an office had emotions, it would have been weeping because it could only do one thing. But in the future, when you don't have to use it for that particular, in that particular way, there's a lot of creativity that could come from that. So I'm excited for others to figure that out.
That transformation that Darren was talking about is the story of me and like where I live, right? I live in the 140th metropolitan area in the United States, right? So what's the Germany equivalent? Like, I live in Bremen, right? So Fort Wayne, Indiana is the post-industrial Midwest, right? It's the education and healthcare hub of a really large rural area, right? And I used to be a school teacher because that served my other identities, right? And now I have a tier 1 job. I have a San Francisco job in Bremen, right? I mean, the analogies are breaking up, but the idea holds is that like we're giving an opportunity for really, really transformational work and transformational incomes, right, to exist in places they have never existed before.
And you're finding talent. Like, Polygon is fortunate to have this person who lives in the proverbial middle of nowhere. This is really powerful.
I think it's kind of going back to what I said before about we need to change the definition of office, right? Because when we're thinking about the role that the office is going to play, it's, okay, well, what does that space actually mean going forward? There's one interesting example. Salesforce just built it's sort of like an offsite space in California, that the idea is that you can go there and post up with your team and get work done, and it's more like a resort than it is like an office, but it serves the purpose of an office if you think about it. So I think we're going to start to see a lot of really interesting versions of offices in the next few years, and hopefully by the end of the next decade, it will be a completely different take on what we think of as an office now. And I think everyone on the stage agrees that there is a time and place for that in-person interaction, and we should be building spaces that facilitate that. I just don't think that it looks like an office looks today.
Yeah, I think kind of interestingly, like I mentioned what my top priority was when I first got hired into this role. The top priority within that was bringing people together physically. So like as the head of remote, my job was to bring people together, which was kind of weird. But we think it's that important, and having a really good in real life IRL strategy is key if this is going to be done sustainably. So whether we're building retreat centers or just doing really awesome retreats, whatever it is, we're bringing people together occasionally rather than inverting that and making them come together all the time and only having a little bit of time apart. So I think that IRL strategy is super important.
Awesome. I think, Peter, you want to come and ask your question?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. You see what they're doing, right? They just constantly talk and don't let anyone in. We can sit here and listen for hours, but I just want to do a little bit of reflection right away with the remote specialists, basically now that you're here, because you all did online sessions together before, right? Mm-hmm. You knew
Yes.
all of you, basically. But did you ever meet in person before?
This is the first time
None,
I meet to lay physical eyes on any of these people. These are remote besties
Yeah.
that
I mean,
are together because of Peter and the Work Motion team. So thank you for making
Well,
that
yeah, that's
happen.
great.
Yeah.
You live
Good
the remote
job.
world, like the remote work life. That's great. But of course, I want to do the reflection. Like, is it worth going through the travel from the US or from Freiburg this time, but usually Spain? Does it? Like, I hope you enjoyed it, of course. But is it worthwhile? Like meeting every once in a while, or?
I'll try to be as quick as I can on this. The answer is yes. And interestingly, in a distributed first world going forward, these in-person moments will be more important than they were before. They were something that could have been taken for granted, something that takes you away from family or community. Because remember, the default used to be you commuted every day into the office. And so the idea of going to an in-person conference is actually not stealing from time you'd spend at work, it's stealing from family. Now it's very different. We want these in our schedule so that we can build rapport. To Chase's point, you build a strategy around it.
Really good. Thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead, Camilla.
No, I was just going to say, I think you do still build bonds differently in real life. And there's something very magical about being able to double down on what you've built in a remote environment by having those in-person touch points.
Yeah, it's a quality over quantity thing. You walk away from these recharged, excited, enthusiastic about what you're doing. When I meet with my team, we get together 2 weeks per year, and I leave those energized and excited, and it carries me for the next few months. So that's the inversion of what it used to be, where you were having to go to these things frequently, you were already commuting to an office, and it drained your battery even further. And I think that's the big difference for me.
Well, that's really well said. That's the great thing of being a native speaker, right? Very eloquent. So thank you very much for this. So Daphnée, Darren, Camilla, Tyler, and Chase. So we've taken a little longer, but that's okay because we have a break now anyway. And after the break, it's the final part. So we're going to talk about emojis, pretty cool. Also about employee benefits, very relevant. And something interesting about ranking for flexibility. So see you back at 4, a little bit after 4 maybe, so in 20, 25 minutes.